After the Great War, the post-apocalyptic struggles that had only been flights of imagination appearing in books and movies became reality. Survivors never anticipated that COVID-19 also survived the war, and the final resulting variation, Thetacron, would only affect males and leave behind less than 100 fertile males worldwide. Females sought to repopulate and realized that quick and aggressive action would be needed for the species to survive, and the Essence of Man project began. The seed of the remaining males needed to be spread throughout the devastated planet. Special vehicles, Essence of Man transports, or EMTs, were created to safely carry these loads throughout the world. That's the concept behind this build. This is the Three Blind Mice Winter in the Wasteland Invitational. And I'm doing a K-7, and I've done them before, and I'm doing one again. I wasn't sure what direction I was going to go with this, and then I had the idea of the Essence of Man transport, like it or not. And a while back, I had printed these pods that you see there, the two white pods. And I thought, well, they'll go well in the back of the K-7. And when I printed these, I probably had printed those out about a year ago. Those are FDM printed. They are not resin printed. That's the like fishing line kind of printers. And they've been sitting around. I thought they'd go on a K-7. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it exactly or what the thought would be. But I thought, well, let's go with this. And so there you see up at the top left, tank tracks that those I downloaded from somewhere on Thingiverse. And it was actually an entire tank, as I recall. And when you tank it into something like Tinkercad, you can cut out sections. So I basically cut the vehicle out of it and just kept the treads. And so the way the K-7 is constructed, that base comes off. And so that section I was going to use and keep separate in the construction, attaching the tracks to that by creating these plastic plates in effect, and creating a thicker, more solid base to hold those tracks. And actually, this turns out being a lot stronger than I realized, because stupidly, I was putting a lot of weight on them at one point. I was pressing down at one point in the build, and then it dawned on me that I was pressing on this structure that I had built, and it took a lot of pressure without snapping, so I was quite pleased with it. I'm using fairly thick styrene for this. That strip I peeled off, I was using masking tape to be the guide as to where I was going to glue this. And here, I use such a variety of components in this build. I do realize this is an exceptionally long video, but I wanted to try and show all of the portions of the build and not blow through them where you might question what was happening. I wanted to show a significant portion of each step so you'd understand what went into it. I created this as square styrene, square tubing that I used to create this frame. I put down the first flat sheet of styrene, then I create this little box frame around it, and then I put another sheet of styrene on top of this. So it ends up being probably about a quarter inch thick or so, if I had to guess. There I'm using Plastistruct cement for the styrene. And that works. If you haven't used it, it's the only way to go with styrene. It melts it together, fusing the styrene. And you just have to be careful with the vapors. There you saw me using super glue for this portion. Again, just there you can see it's like a 1/4 inch thick. And then what happens, this is pretty much a freestanding unit, but then I attach this to the base of the K-7 that comes off. Any excuse to use JB Weld. Come on, you knew I was going to use that in this build. Like I said, this build uses a wide variety of stuff. And I had made a list of everything that was on here, and you'll see it in the description. I tried to make a list of everything I used, and I forgot to put JB Weld on the list, so I'm going to have to add it. Here what I'm doing, I decided not to file off the wheel wells. I'm just filling them in with the JB Weld. Again, this is since this is a post-apocalyptic build, I don't want it to be too pretty. I like the roughness that's there. It's also a reason why, like on Gasland's post-apocalyptic builds, I don't file down a lot of the seams on a casting, like the casting lines. I tend to leave those because I like the look. Again, it adds something to catch the eye. It's another thing that if you're going over something, say with Nuln Oil, the roughness is good. It's also an advantage in a weird way to like the pods being FDM printed. They have kind of a texture to them that the resin printing wouldn't have. What you see me peeling off here, what I'll do a lot of times is I'll use masking tape to figure out, like I used it to decide the sizes of what I was trying to fill in there in the bottom of that casting. I used masking tape at first, went over it with pencil to draw the lines. Then I stuck that tape down on the styrene and cut it out from the styrene. And so then what you see when you see me peeling something off of the styrene, like right there, I'm just peeling that masking tape off. And that was just for cutting guideline. Again, since the wheels on the K-7 are gone, I'm filling in those wheel well openings on the base. The metal you see there is the base of the K-7 casting after it's been attached to the styrene. I used junk model parts. These were scraps. I thought I might use all of them. I used some of them. I used parts of some of them. And a shoestring. This may not have the kitchen sink, but it has a shoestring. And yes, this was off of one of my old tennis shoes that I knew I needed a shoestring and I didn't have an extra one laying around. So found an old pair of tennis shoes and just ripped the thing out of there. The shoestring is used to create the soft seal between the pods and the cab, between each pod and the cab. And so the one you see me doing there is the one between that first pod and the cab, because I didn't just want to butt it up against there with nothing. You'd have a seal between those if people are going to be moving between those pods. Those pods carry the seed, the essence of man that's been captured or retrieved, or however you want to think of it. That's up to you. You don't see skulls on this because it's way past that Mad Max period of post-apocalyptic time, the way I see it. But there does need to be some defense, because somebody out there is going to want to steal your vats of essence of man. That's just the way it is. So, yeah, maybe it's a warped vision. So this thing has rockets, but those are resin printed. The rockets that you see there are resin printed. It's a set of 2. Those are Sable Badger designed, as are the pods. That's a scrap model part you see there. It's actually half of an exhaust off of an old model car. The chrome has been stripped off of it, and it just fits that little spot perfectly. As I said, the pods are designed by Sable Badger. The rockets are designed by Sable Badger. And his designs I've been using for quite a while. You've heard me mention them probably several times before. And they're available on Thingiverse. And that I just CA glue into place, the exhaust there. You see some tanks there on the side near where my fingers are. Those come out. I was messing around with ideas at that point. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll stick some of these on the outside of the pods. Those do not stay there. They were just placed there at that point. It's not like I had glued them down. One thing, you see that back pod has a different color roof to it. We're actually going to get to see inside the pod. The way those were designed, you could actually slide the door out. And so I left the roof piece loose. And you'll see in the end result how we can see in that back pod the storage containers. I also, what you see me doing here, I have flags on the back so that the Essence of Man transports can be seen coming and not attacked or anything like that. Those are basically holders for the flags. They're just little brass tubes that I threw there, and you'll see me create the flags later in the video. And those I just super glued in place. If you look to the top right, that is actually the back door that you'll see later going into the back pod. And you see how under my finger there, the back pod is open. That is the one pod that we get to look into. There was this rough vent kind of area between the top doors on the K-7. I filed that off because I dug through my scrap bin of electronics parts. What I like to do is, rather than throwing old electronics away just into the trash, or selfishly, rather than just donating them, I rip them apart. And I believe this came off of an old telephone system that we had, and it just had an interesting look to it, that little round thing. So I just super glued that in place, and the doors, even with the tracks, do open. That was part of the reason for how I distanced the tracks from the body, and I was fortunate in that the design of the tracks had an open area in that top section. And so it allowed me to place it. It turned out really well, the placement on those tracks. I'm lucky that I found those because they worked out really well with this particular K-7 casting. I scaled them to size, which is one of the nice things about printing your own stuff. And this is actually a set of 4 rockets, just like the rockets that were on the back. And busted out the bare metal foil. Wasn't sure what I was going to do for that front windshield. And since this thing isn't really under attack, and it's winter, you can't just have it open, and you can't just have it be screen or tubes. I mean, it has to be sealed off to protect the occupants. So I thought, well, by that point in time, probably a metal film would provide protection from the elements. So what I ended up doing is just taking, I had cleaned off that glass at that point, and then I just covered it with the bare metal foil, which is just super thin foil. You just kind of rub it into place. It's adhesive on one side. Works great for all kinds of things. It is very delicate, though, for lack of a better way of putting it. It can take a lot, but yet at the same time, it's very easy to tear. And I decided what I wanted to do was cut just basically a viewing strip through that. And so I took masking tape that you see here, wrapped it around that window, and then I took an X-Acto knife with a brand new blade. If you go to work with bare metal foil, the one thing you always want to do is bust out a new blade so you have the sharpest thing possible, so when you go to cut it, it doesn't snag in any way. You needed to cut it very easily and precisely. And so once that masking tape was in place, I just used that as the guide and then cut on both sides of that with the X-Acto knife. I didn't care about cutting the plastic because, yeah, it's not going to be used for anything else. I thought about vacuum forming glass for it, and I thought, well, what's the point of that? Because I'm not going to be using this glass on. I have other K-7s, sure I could have saved it for that, but some of those have glass, and I'll worry about those when I get to them. But there you see, since I had cut it with a new blade, pulling that masking tape off takes that thin strip of bare metal foil off. They do sell bare metal foil adhesives separately, so I'm going to try that at some point with just regular aluminum foil to see what it's like. But that's in the future. Kind of like this build. Hopefully, there I'm just burnishing it down a little bit better. What I end up doing, I do go over this before it goes into the build with Duplicolor metal cast smoke rattle can paint to give it a little bit darker tint and to protect the bare metal foil a little bit. It gave it a better look, a darker look. Here I'm using brass tube and solid brass rod just to add some additional detail down the sides of the pods. I figured in a way to, I'm assuming that these pods are climate controlled. And so I imagined these tubes down the sides help provide that climate control. And so I end up putting tubes on both sides. This side has this brass tubing that goes in. And as I recall, we'll probably see it here in a minute, but as I recall, I believe I use aluminum tubing on the other side. I have a bunch of, I bought, much like, excuse me, much like with styrene, you can get these bulk random bags of stuff. And so it's always good to have the odds and ends of styrene. And I did the same thing with brass and aluminum chunks. Through K&S, they do have these, like, for lack of a better way of describing it, grab bags of stuff. And when you're doing builds like this, it's just handy to have a wide variety of crap around. The more crap, the better. You can ask me what size the tubing is, and I couldn't tell you if I had to because it's the one that I thought looked best there. And it was just out of this junk bag. Again, that's just super glued into place as well. At this point, I have these tanks that were resin printed, and I'm decorating, for lack of a better way of putting it, the inside of the pod that you do get to see into. And what I end up doing in there is I put tanks around the walls. I have a resin printed piece that I put in the center of the floor, and another resin printed piece that becomes the door between the pods. There you see the floor piece going in. All of those are CA glued into place. And they pretty much just got some Nuln Oil. I did put a gray base coat down. That's a primer. It's not really a paint, it's just a primer coat. And then what I did here, again, it's that idea I got from Danny over at Danny's Diecast Disasters, where he used clay to do camouflage paint. And it's such a brilliant idea, and I love doing it. And I think this is the third time I've done camo paint this way. It's the first time I recall going with this winter type camo. So after putting this clay down, I hit it with white lacquer. And then I wasn't quite happy with it. And so then after, I hit it with white lacquer, and then you pull this clay off and you get the camo effect. And then I got really far away from it and did a very light dusting of white. And I ended up with that effect that you see up at the top. You see the grayish area isn't as gray as it was originally because of that dusting. And again, this is all done with rattle can paints. That's a Molotow red pen that I'm doing for the fronts of the rockets to give them a little detail. Hit Nuln Oil in a bunch of different areas on here. particularly the pods. That center pod there, the front pod, had this cool vent in the top of it. And so I just null oiled the heck out of that thing. And I love the way this thing turned out. It may be one of my favorite parts of the entire build. And once everything was done, I did go over everything, including what you will see happening to the tracks in a little bit. I did go over it with a flat clear, but here I just CA glue the glass in place. It can go in now because, there's no point in doing it later. So there you see how that turned out. And part of me, looking at it, kind of regrets that I just didn't go full solid and not cut that strip out and just treat it as a metallic layer that you can still see through. I don't know. It's the future. I don't know what they have then. I won't be around then, and odds are I wouldn't have been one of the fertile male survivors of Thetacron anyway. So I'm winging it. I painted that even though I don't show it. The doors do open, but I painted that little detail there that is already cast into this. I didn't like the chrome center between the headlights, and so I just blackened that out, and that's with some of the Citadel contrast paints. I forget if it's Black Templar or something like that. I painted a lot of detail into the tracks, even though it really gets lost. I went over those sections with this dark gold gray paint. And then I do a lot of stuff. I go over those with track wash, as you'll see here in a bit. Again, at this point, I'm just popping that center in again because why not? I don't need to save these things till the end to go together like a typical build, because this is far from a typical build. The sides, I don't know if you noticed on the K-7, but the windows on the doors, I did put some 3D pieces covering those. You see those two lumps on the bottom plate there? Those are just old scrap model parts. Part of that batch you saw me put into the Super Clean earlier. I thought that base plate was just far too plain, being a solid square of styrene. So I just jazzed it up a little bit. And nobody sees it. But I know it's there. You know it's there now. And nobody else will ever see this. There I am using the AK Interactive track wash. And I thought the tracks and everything there looked great. But this is winter, and so as happy as I was how those turned out, they don't stay that way. Because I put winter effect snow on them. I've had these winter effect snow stuff, well over a year. It's way back to when I did the Sherp build, and I was going to have snow effects for that, and then I didn't. And so that was the Matchbox Snow Track build, the 3x Mice build. I ended up not using it for that, and I think this stuff doesn't age well. But I just did the tracks with snow. I did not do the vehicle itself, mainly because I didn't think it would look good. And so I just did the tracks as if this is rolling through already fallen snow. Yeah, I know. These are my ideas on how this is working out. Your ideas may vary. That stuff is like adhesive. It comes in that kit, and it's like snowy adhesive, which is kind of weird. And then you sprinkle this snow over it. So you can see how, like, a lot of the look of the tracks, I think they benefited from all the detail I put on them, but it isn't as obvious all the detail I put into painting those tracks once you hit them with the snow. And then you remember I mentioned flags. Well, I knew what I wanted to appear on the flags. And yes, it's kind of warped, but it's me. And so I just took paper And, you know, I cut these flags to the size I thought they should be. And I didn't want to weather them. I wanted them to have a certain look. And you'll see that coming up. But, you know, that's just... I took these little wire or rod, you know, these rods, put the flags on them. Used that PVA glue. Eileen's glue. Used that, made the flags, and then I chose 2 different colors for the flags. I ended up painting one yellow, as you see here, and that's really watered down. I watered the heck out of that paint. You know, those are Army painter paints, both this yellow and the blue you'll see coming up. Watered the heck out of it down and just brushed it on there. And then I had decals. Okay, maybe this is my favorite part of the build. How truly demented these decals are. Come on, it's the Essence of Man project. You know, it's this is an EMT, an Essence of Man transport. You have to have a flag representing that. And this is a 3 blind mice build. And it's totally a coincidence, oddly enough, that the 3 little squiggly guys that you saw there a minute ago were on that decal. It happened to be the decal I, you know, used clip art for off whatever the first thing was that came up online, pretty much. Captured that image, did my little squiggles on that, and then I had my little 3 blind mice decals for the other flag. I did go over these flags once they dried out with flat clear. And at this point, we just attach the base. I didn't put too much snow on the bottom. I had a ton on there at one point, and it looked like crap. And so I wiped it all off. And then add the flags. So that's pretty much the build. I hope you don't think the story's too demented. If you do, I guess I did it right. So thank you for all of you supporting these 3 blind mice builds. There's a lot of people participating in this Winter in the Wasteland build. So please check out all of their builds. We will have a recap video on the 3 blind mice channel. Be sure and subscribe to that channel. There is a link in the description to this video to get you there. And yeah, here's where we ended up, the EMT. A little bit different than your usual EMT, huh? The pod is closed in these pictures that you see here, but in some of the glamour shots coming up, you'll get a good look inside the back. I hope you like this build. I am absolutely thrilled with this build, to be honest with you. It was fun. There you can see inside. And thank you for watching these, and thank you for... I'm sure you're shaking your head watching this, but that's half the fun, you know? I hope you all had fun watching this video. As much fun as I had building and doing this video. Thank you for all of your support and subscribing to the channel and all you've done for me this past year, and I want to wish you all a Happy New Year this year. Thanks to my Patreon supporters for all of their help. And everybody stay safe and healthy out there. I'll catch you in the next one.